The last identities that we're going to work with on section 7.4 are your even and odd identities. Don't forget, these are on your cheat sheet. We talked about what happens when we have a negative argument. We're not allowed to have a negative argument. We can't work with that. But there are two identities which are even. Do you remember what those are? Look at your notes. Cosine and secant are even identities. And even identities allow us to simply drop the negative sign and rewrite it as cosine of theta or secant of theta. We're allowed to just drop the negative sign completely. So we love that. Anytime we see cosine of theta, we just drop the negative. Anytime we see cosine of negative theta, we just drop the negative. But what did we do with the odd identities? We had to throw the negative to the front. Now it's still just as easy to work with, but we can't drop the negative. We have to throw it to the front. So when we have a problem that says I establish identities and it's got negatives, we have to look at it first of all and see, what does this really mean? This is the sine of negative theta all squared. So I'm going to write what it really means. Sine of negative theta all squared plus the cosine of negative theta all squared equals 1. Well, this is an odd identity, so let me throw that to the front. Negative sine of theta squared. This is an even identity, so we can just drop it. Cosine of theta squared. Well, negative times negative, so a negative squared would give me positive sine squared theta. Cosine theta all squared is cosine squared theta. And that is a Pythagorean identity. It's worth 1. And 1 is always equal to 1. So we have established an identity that had even and odd particles to it. Now let's look at this next problem. This is our last one that we're going to do for section 7.4. The top part is a little different. First of all, notice it's sine squared negative theta minus. So that's going to be a little different. Let's keep that in mind. But we do know that sine squared negative theta, let's look back here, sine squared negative theta can be just written as sine squared theta. So I'm going to rewrite that as sine squared theta. And we know that cosine squared negative theta can just be written as cosine squared theta. And I'm going to put a minus sign in between because that's what was in the problem. Over, now this right here, we're going to throw that negative sign to the front. So negative sine of theta minus, and what are we going to do with that negative sign? We're just going to drop it. When we look at the problem, what is sine squared theta minus cosine squared theta? Some of you are thinking 1. Now it's not. If it was sine squared plus cosine squared, that would be 1. But since it's minus, it's a difference of squares. Remember that pattern? X squared minus 1. And so we factored x plus 1 times x minus 1. Well, this is sine squared minus cosine squared. So we're going to factor that as sine of theta plus cosine theta times sine of theta minus cosine theta. All still over. You know, I don't like that negative right there. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1, making it sine of theta plus cosine of theta. I factored out a negative 1 from both terms, and I got negative 1 times sine of theta plus cosine theta. Do you see here that we have two factors that are identical? Sine theta plus cosine theta, sine theta plus cosine theta. And what does that leave me with? Sine of theta divided by negative 1, which is negative sine of theta, negative cosine divided by negative 1, which is positive cosine of theta. And the order of operations, the commutative property says I can rewrite this problem as the cosine theta first because it's positive, as long as I move the negative sign with the sine of theta. Now go back and look. It's exactly equal to the other side. So we have established that the two sides are really equal, and we have finished establishing identities. This set actually gets better the easier the more you practice. If you're looking for practice problems, don't forget all of the odd problems for section 7.4 have answers in the back of the book. Make sure you practice those if you're looking for extra practice problems.